Okay, I think we might be live. How are we doing over there? Are we live? As far as you can tell?
Checking here. Yeah.
Okay. So I mentioned in my post that there's a few things I wanted to talk to you guys about. I have some updates, nothing earth-shattering, but just a few updates I want to give you guys. I want to talk a little bit about Trudeau's recent sanctions against a Russian oligarch, Roman Abramovich, I think it's pronounced, who's a bazillionaire apparently and owns a soccer club in the UK. And also anything else that you guys wanted me to address, I'm certainly open to discussing that. So if you have a specific question or something you want me to talk about, just put it in the comments and my intrepid producer will let me know what's coming across the transom there. So it's been a long go with the Ottawa police, and a lot of that's on me, frankly, in terms of getting back to them during business hours. I have started a new job, so I don't always have the availability to talk to them. But finally, today was the first time I was able to actually connect with a live person on the phone, and he was actually really helpful. I'll just walk you through some of the minor details, just if you haven't followed the story. So on February 12th, you've probably seen the video of the flag thief guy who yoinked the flag from my 13-year-old daughter, and I was able to film him, and he twisted his ankle at the end and said, "I deserve this," if you recall. Anyway, so there was that incident. I left my name and number with the police at the time. I also told them that I had video evidence that I wanted to share. And then no one got back to me. And I think it was at least a week, maybe 2 weeks. And then finally I called them, spent a lot of time on hold, did an online report, which got rejected basically through their online reporting system somehow. Then I left a message. Then I heard back from someone. And this was, I guess, they said I needed to contact the robbery unit. And she gave me, I guess, an unpublished extension. And I rang that today, and after like 2 rings, I had a real live detective on the other end, and he was actually quite helpful. So I don't know what happened. He seemed to think, according to the initial report, that both, I guess, victims, myself and the other fellow who was kind of grappling with the flag thief, that we both said we didn't want to press charges, which is not what I said. I can't remember exactly what I said. The closest thing that could be construed as me not wanting to press charges, and I definitely did not say that I don't want to press charges. I think I said, I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that. But it certainly seemed that the police were going to be in touch either way, just for the video evidence. Anyway, the good news is we can still go ahead with this. So the detective, it wasn't really his area, from what I'm told. So he was going to have someone else call me, but he was actually quite helpful. You kind of can tell sometimes when you're dealing with sort of customer service and you finally find the person who is actually going to take responsibility to make sure that your issue gets heard. So he gave me his direct line, he gave me his name and badge number. And I guess he hadn't looked at my report, so he was kind of reading it and I was telling him about it. So I think I'm in good hands with that detective. So hopefully we'll hear something back, and I would like to press charges against the flag thief fellow. I've thought about it for a while, and I think it's important. I mean, anyway, well, I'll leave it there. I'll keep you guys updated. It's been, I think, almost a month to the day, or maybe tomorrow would be the 1 month since the flag thief guy took the flag. And it's worth kind of just reiterating, he was the only like violent or unreasonable, even the guy who called me a white supremacist wasn't as bad. Well, he wasn't physical anyway. So on that note, I've been looking through some of my Ottawa footage, and I was shooting a lot more than I ever posted. That's just sort of the nature of it. And I think it's important that we keep this discussion going in terms of the Ottawa protests, the vaccine mandates. I know that the news has shifted to Russia and Ukraine, and understandably so, and I will touch on that in a little bit. But I think it's important that we don't lose sight of the fact that a government invoked what is essentially the War Measures Act, or the Emergencies Act, on its people Um, and I mean, even the RCMP commissioner was basically saying that they couldn't have been able to remove all those people had it not been for the Emergencies Act. This is a big deal, I think, in our society. And I think we need to keep our politicians on notice that we will not be forgetting about that and that we need answers. And they are investigating it. And I think we just need to keep that story going. But anyway, on the business of Ottawa, I did edit. I made another video that I haven't posted yet. It was another counter post protester, so I'm hoping to put that up in the next few days. And also, there's lots of other stories that I just didn't fit in the video, so I'm hoping to maybe just cut a few of those together. I think they're important stories from individuals and their reasons for coming out to Ottawa several weeks ago. So look for that. I hope to put some more material up there if that's of interest. Other updates. Today, I officially made probably definitely the first, and almost certainly not the last payment to a law firm to initiate action against my former employer, the township that employed me as a volunteer firefighter. I had asked for some material from HR, I believe, and I got a note back from their lawyer basically telling me that the township won't be dealing with me directly anymore and that I can deal with him. So he and I went back and forth via email. I've asked for documents like a copy of my employee file. And I've worked in HR for years. I'm a recovering HR professional. And in my experience, it's fairly customary in these matters to share like documentation such as employee files, disciplinary file. I know that I have no discipline before I was fired. They don't have it, but I asked for that anyway. Anyway, I'm a little surprised that they're not handing that over. I think things are quite emotional with them. But anyway, I did have a call with a law firm, and I'm sure it'll be a long road. It'll probably be expensive. There's not a lot of money really to be won in the end. I was part-time. I hadn't worked there for very long. But I think it's the principle. I think it's important that when people seem to be, taking an authoritarian approach or taking a heavy-handed approach, at least for enforcing these vaccine mandates. I was looking at some of the documentation the other day. They called it the Mandatory Vaccine Verification Program, which is kind of Orwellian. Anyway, so that has started. Update on the flag thief. I did have a couple questions, I think, that came in after I posted that I'd be doing a live stream. One of them asked about Pat King and whether or not he's been bailed out or what's going on with him. And I should say, I mentioned Pat King. I guess one of you guys wrote me a comment that I responded to, and you mentioned Pat King. At the time, I said I didn't know much about him, and I think the comment was basically saying, "Isn't he a racist? And why is your cause mixed up with his cause?" Something to that effect. Anyway, I don't have it in front of me. And I have had a chance to saw at least one video from Pat King, and I think it was on TikTok. And frankly, yes, what he was saying is not things I support. He was saying things that I think are racist. I can't remember exactly what he said, but suggesting that people of certain lineage were superior, or alluding to that anyway, to people of other lineages, which I denounce. I happen to be a person of faith who looks to the Bible for a lot of my wisdom and understanding of my worldview. And according to the Bible, it says that God created human beings in his own image. And I believe, well, there's a lot of theology freighted in that short line, but among other things, I think it means that each of us who are human should be afforded a certain dignity and have a certain worth just by dint of bearing the image of our Creator. And that applies across races and lineages, et cetera, et cetera. So, but in terms of Pat King's actual arrest, I haven't been following that. I did read a couple articles just to prepare for this. And it is strange. So brings me to another point I wanted to make. So on the one hand, yes, it does look like Pat King made some racist comments, which isn't I do not support. However, at the same time, he, I assume, is a Canadian citizen, but at the very least, he is created in the image of God and should be treated equitably in our legal system. Now, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what normal is, but it seems a little strange that Tamara Leach, up until very recently, was denied bail, and now Pat King still hasn't received bail for what I understand are relatively minor charges. Again, I'm not a lawyer. That he was charged with mischief, counseling to commit mischief, counseling to disobey a court order. So I looked up the mischief, and it seems relatively minor. It's the sort of, according to one article that I was looking at, it had nothing to do with Pat King or Ottawa, but just talking about what mischief under the Criminal Code of Canada is. And it's generally used when someone commits vandalism. Basically, the destruction of property or ruining property. Actually, what might be a good definition is if you were hypothetically to take someone's gloves on a winter's day and put them in a slush puddle and stomp on them, perhaps that is mischief. So I mean, it's illegal. It's a criminal charge. So in that sense, I guess anything criminal is serious. But in terms of, murder, arson, embezzlement, threatening violence, that kind of thing, it's relatively minor. So it does seem a little strange that he and Tamara were both denied bail for quite a while, although Tamara did get released. It's also worth noting that the original judge, at least in Tamara's case, I don't know about Pat King, happened to be a former Liberal candidate, I think in 2015. I'll have to check that. But anyway, Trudeau spoke highly of her. I believe it's a her, Julie. I don't know the name. Anyway, I won't guess. But that's clearly a conflict where you have a prime minister invoking the Emergencies Act, and then the justice that's assigned to hear the bail for some of the leaders is a former Liberal Party candidate. That doesn't seem right. And this is kind of, it's disturbing. It seems some people have called like Tamara Leach a political prisoner. I haven't really turned that over in my mind, so I don't know that I necessarily agree with that label. It's a pretty strong label, but I'm not too quick to dismiss it either. Just off the top of my head without looking it up, a political prisoner, someone who is incarcerated or kept detained because of their political views. So my sense is, had Tamara Leach did something else that was apolitical, but the other particulars were the same, like maybe protesting something that had nothing to do with Trudeau, and found herself in the same situation, I would be surprised if she would be denied bail. Just for contrast, the person in somewhere in Manitoba who drove a car through the crowd of protesters, thankfully no one was killed, but I think 4 people were injured. I believe he was released on $10,000 bail. Anyway, it is a little worrying to see our governments using their political and or administrative authority to exact their political will on people. I'll just talk to my producer here. Any questions you think I should address at this point, or I will talk about Roman?
Not right now.
Okay. So I read in a number of news outlets today that our prime minister, I guess he was in Poland, and he announced, if I understand this correctly, and I did look at a number of articles, and I was kind of surprised and dismayed that none of the ones that I looked at really went into a lot of detail, maybe because the story just happened today. But as I understand it, the federal government has put sanctions on a number of specific Russian oligarchs or Russian billionaires. And as I understand it, it means that any assets that that person has that are in Canada or somehow controlled by Canada are effectively frozen. And one in particular, his name is Roman Abramovich, I think it's pronounced. And he is a minority holder of a steel company that's based in the UK but has holdings in Canada. And this struck me as odd. I mean, it can be tempting. I realize this could get misunderstood. So I got to be a little careful here. I don't think Putin should be invading other countries, full stop. that's wrong. However, as we've seen in these past 2 years, governments have shown us that there's an emergency or that there's something dangerous out there or pressing, and then have used that as a means to seize control. And I'm not sure what mechanism the government uses to seize his assets exactly. I don't think Parliament has to pass anything. It seems like Justin Trudeau just utters it. I'm not sure legally how that works. And it can be tempting to say, well, I'm not a Russian oligarch. I don't have $12.3 billion. So what do I have to worry about? But we should be questioning well, there's a whole bunch of things here in no particular order. One, it's a Russian oligarch today, but what would prevent a future government from just declaring that you are supporting Putin or some foreign national, and just by uttering that, your accounts get frozen? We saw that with the trucker convoy. Now, that was done under the Emergency Act, which I think was not legitimate under the circumstances, but at least there was an act that was invoked. The fact that Abramovich is not a Canadian citizen, that might play into this. Presumably, if he was a Canadian citizen, he'd have more protection against that type of thing, or at least some sort of due process. I'm not sure if a court needs to look at this. I'm not sure if there's some threshold that needs to be met to show that his holdings are somehow affecting the war effort. And I'm not saying that they're not. Like, maybe, for all I know, maybe his steel mills are producing goods that are turning into tanks. But if that is the case, to me, there should be some sort of threshold or burden of proof that a government would need to meet before people's assets get frozen. And then, so there's that. And also, just when I think of many sort of third world countries or countries that have been economically depressed, not exclusively, but I think of like sub-Saharan Africa historically, places in Latin America. There's been a cycle where we don't have stable governments and we don't have strong property rights. Foreign investment tends not to go there. So if you're an oligarch from another country that might be questionable, and you're thinking of investing in a Canadian steel mill or something, this might make you less likely to invest in Canada, and rightfully so. I realize it's a fine line. We don't necessarily want bad actors profiting in Canada, but just very quickly, and what seems like no process whatsoever, we just sanction people. It's one thing to sanction a country if we say Canada will no longer accept goods and services from this particular country. That's one thing. But to sanction an individual, I think there was 5 individuals he sanctioned, and now their assets in Canada are frozen without any judicial review. That seems a little bit over the top. And also, I guess, the foreign investment is a problem. And I feel like there's one other thing I wanted to say about that, and it escaped me. But just having governments sort of take things, or oh, yes, the unintended consequences. Trudeau said something, I think I have it here. He basically says, so this is a quote from Trudeau here. He says, "The sanctions on Russian officials and oligarchs like Abramovich are directed at them so that they cannot profit or benefit from the economic activities in Canada or the hard work of Canadians working in companies that they have invested in." He goes on. It's here somewhere. Anyway, the gist is, he said, like, he's quite sure that there's going to be no unintended consequences, or it won't affect Canadians. And that's a pretty brazen thing to say. I mean, that's one thing that sort of bothers me with Trudeau and his ilk, is not understanding that there are always unintended consequences, especially when you're dealing with complex systems like a virus, a human body, medicine, economic systems. There's going to be unintended consequences. So this steel company that Abramovich owns, I think 30% of, now this had to do with the UK sanctions, but as soon as the UK announced similar sanctions, like 10 members of the board of directors resigned. So I'm not sure exactly what that means. I guess they get new directors. But to say that that has no effect on the operations of this global company is I mean, we don't know what the effects are, but we can be pretty certain it won't be nothing. It will be something. Will it be horrible and bad? Not necessarily. Could it be benign? Sure. But to say that definitely this will not affect Canadians who are working in these steel mills, that is absurd. Um, I'm not sure if I've shared this, but I know I talk a lot about the CBC. I actually used to work for the CBC years ago, and I was reminded of this collective agreement that was my daily life for a long time. Working on the management side, but much of my job involved having to deal with the unions. But one thing about this agreement, without getting into too much CBC history, this agreement, well, this started in 2009, was based on an earlier agreement, which itself was a brand new agreement after the lockout of 2005. And I won't bore you with all the history, but in this agreement, there's an amalgamation of different unions coming together. They made fundamental changes to, they were trying to update, they introduced temporary workers. It was a big deal. And my point of that story is, even like many years, that was before my time at CBC. I joined in the very early days of 2008. But even though several years had already passed, the organization was still trying to work out what these new articles in the collective agreement would actually mean practically. And that's not because it was a bunch of dummies who didn't know better. Like, people on both sides, the union side and the management side, they crafted the language. They thought they knew what it might mean, but really no one knows until you enact it, and then you get arbitrators looking at it. I think also of like IT. I used to work for a large IT company. Any complex system, you could have the smartest engineers. If it's sufficiently complicated, they'll tell you that although you can run tests and test environments and QA environments before you go live, it's not until you actually go live that you really know for sure how that new complex program is going to react. So complex systems are inherently unpredictable. And when we start messing with them without any thought, it's a recipe for, well, unintended consequences. So that was the other thing that worries me. We have our prime minister who is, invoking these. And the other thing, I mean, there's the effectiveness of the sanctions. So what is this guy to do? He has money elsewhere as well. But my guess is, if Putin is the strong man that he's purported to be, and I have no reason to doubt that, is if he's a successful strong man, any one oligarch is not doesn't have sufficient wealth or political power to overthrow him. Now these oligarchs have even less power, so they're probably even less likely to be able to invoke a coup. I'm not sure if that's what Trudeau was trying to do. And even that, is that even a good idea? There was a senator in the US who basically, I'm not sure if it was veiled or not, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it certainly sounded like a call to assassinate Putin. And that might seem like a good idea, I suppose, to some people, but who's to say that whoever takes over for Putin is going to be any better? Again, unintended consequences. A country like Russia, or any country, it's sufficiently large, it's in the midst of a war, and there's a coup. Do we know that is going to make things necessarily better for Ukraine, for Russia, for the West, for the world? I mean, anyway, I could go on. So that's these sanctions are troubling. Pat King, we talked about the township, the flag. Any questions? What questions are we getting?
I'm not sure how to pronounce this, but
Okay.
Someone's asking, why does the Ukraine flag have a Khazarian tamga on it?
Why does the Ukraine flag have a Usarian? I'm not sure. The short answer is I don't know. I don't know much about the Ukrainian flag other than it's mostly blue and yellow. I don't know much about Ukraine other than years ago we had some Ukrainian orphans stay with us for a summer. You're probably too young to remember that, aren't you? Do you remember the Ukrainian girls?
No, I don't.
No, I think you were pretty little. Anyway, sorry, don't know why there's a such and such thing on the Ukrainian flag.
What else? All for questions.
That's all for questions? Okay. Well, we will keep it there. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it. Please do send me comments of the sorts of things you'd like me to cover. Still experimenting with this platform and the live streams. So do appreciate you watching, and point me in the right direction. And as long as it's something that resonates with me, I'll certainly consider talking about it. Thanks, and have a good night and a good weekend. We are out.